Anybody who's ever worked in an IT position knows that you'll regularly find yourself having to work in weird pockets of time where nobody else is working to keep things running behind the scenes. And that was the case for an accomplished 26-year-old computer programmer in 1989. She went into the office a couple of times on a Sunday to run an inventory program, the second time being around 9 p.m. when it was wrapping up. She left a cryptic digital footprint before vanishing. The next day, workers filed into the office and found troubling clues. Someone had set a small fire in the building, and the space was flooded from the sprinklers kicking on. Even more disturbing was a pool of blood mixed in the water near their beloved computer programmer's desk. These ominous findings prompted a massive search, and while many clues and a prime suspect emerged, she has never been seen again. My name is Megan, and each week on A Simpler Time True Crime, I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved disappearance of Lisa Wallace Geise. Shy and reserved until she got to know you. Studious, deeply religious, family-oriented, hard worker. These are all the ways Lisa Wallace Geise was described by her family and friends. She was born Lisa Marie Wallace on December 18, 1962, in Mobile, Alabama, to Jean and Jack Wallace. She was the middle child and known as the peacemaker of her tight-knit family. When she was in the first grade, the family relocated to North Carolina, and when she was in the fifth grade, they would again relocate to Pensacola, Florida. This time, they found their roots. At least, Jean and Jack did. Lisa was ambitious and quick-witted and was always feeling a pull to move someplace new or try the next thing. She graduated 8th in her class of 480 at Woodham High School before attending the University of West Florida. While Lisa was still attending college, she married a man named David Geise. She studied accounting information systems and computer programming, hoping to make her mark in this emerging field of technology. She excelled and graduated in 1985. Her young marriage did not last, and she got divorced the same year she graduated college, though her and David remained the best of friends, and it was all very amicable. Towards late 1987, Lisa was contacted by a headhunter and asked to travel to Norcross, Georgia for an interview. Norcross is about 20 miles northeast of Atlanta, and the company was called Larson Picture Frames, Inc. It was a well-established manufacturer and distributor of custom picture frames. It's still around, but is now a much bigger business and renamed Larson Jewel. It's now a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway. Back in the late 80s, it had just 90 employees. Lisa interviewed for a computer programmer position and landed the job. This was promising. This is the late 1980s, and computers still had a long way to go to be what they are today, and having this kind of expertise and role in her mid-20s was a big deal. Lisa had actually taught herself how to program a computer when she was a kid, working alongside her brother in the family auto shop. Lisa relocated from Pensacola to Norcross and moved in with 2 roommates in an apartment just 5 minutes from work. Lisa was excited for this opportunity, but also torn. It was still scary to take the leap and part ways with her close family and church community. Lisa's roommates were Kathy Crick and Carol Atkinson. They got along really well and enjoyed spending time together. As I mentioned at the top of this episode, sometimes IT jobs require weird hours to do things behind the scenes and do tasks when people aren't working. This was not uncommon for Lisa, nor was her working overtime. She was very devoted to her job. One of her roles was running month-end inventory, and she planned to do this on Sunday, February 26, 1989. On that morning, a physical inventory was completed. Then, here's what we know about the rest of her day. That evening, after 6 p.m., Lisa went to the office to run the computer that posted the inventory. This routine took a few hours, so while the routine was running, Lisa went back home to have dinner and hang out for a while with her roommates, Kathy and Carol. They would later share that Lisa came home around 7:30 p.m. Lisa had mentioned craving a 7-layer salad, and so Carol, being the sweet roommate that she was, whipped one up for all of them for dinner with a side of baked potato. Her roommates shared that Lisa was in a great mood, and they talked about normal everyday things and that she had no anxiety or any sense that something was wrong. Lisa was looking forward to some upcoming life changes. She was engaged to a man named Mark, who was an Air Force captain stationed in the Philippines. He was set to arrive home in just a couple of weeks, and then they were getting married in a small ceremony. But none of that happy and promising future would come to be. After finishing dinner and visiting with her roommates a bit longer, Lisa dragged herself back to the office so that she could finish up the last of the inventory routine and head home to go to sleep before she needed to return the next morning. Computer records show that she logged into the computer at 9:30 p.m., that she was actively working on the computer for 4 to 5 minutes, and then everything stopped. By the time she was going back into the office that evening, her roommates were planning to go to bed, so they didn't notice that she hadn't come home. That was until around 6 a.m. on Monday morning, February 27th. That morning, the apartment phone rang a few times and Lisa didn't get it, and she was always known to be the first one to answer the phone. Carol answered the phone and was surprised to hear Lisa's supervisor on the other end. The man, whose name was Bill, was looking to speak to Lisa to see if she had any idea what had happened with the sprinkler system in the office building. He knew she had planned to be at the office on Sunday, and he thought she might have some insight. So Carol knocked at her door, and she was shocked to see that Lisa was not only not home, but that her bed had also not been slept in. Sensing something was off, they called police to report her missing. This might seem like an overreaction, but remember, Lisa had only lived in Georgia for a year. Her fiancé was overseas, and she wasn't a partier, she didn't go out a lot, she mainly had her roommates and the people she worked with. She had plans that night to just go into the office and then come home. Her friends also began to frantically page her, but they weren't getting calls back. With this being completely out of character, Lisa's roommate Carol also called Lisa's parents down in Pensacola and told them that Lisa hadn't come home that night and that there was something suspicious happening at her workplace. The Wallaces knew something was wrong right away, so they rented a car and began the 6-hour journey north. A journey made longer by the fact that Jean kept having Jack pull over to use payphones so that she could call to see if there had been any updates. Remember, this is 1989, so there was no text check-ins back then and no live updates. I imagine this was so difficult. There's this pull that you want to get there as soon as humanly possible and just be present for the search for her and to try to figure out what was happening. But at the same time, you have such a journey ahead of you. You, of course, want to check in and see maybe this has all just been a bad dream or a mistake and Lisa's fine and they found her. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Megan, back it up. You're talking about Lisa being missing, but you just glazed over the fact that we even know this because her boss called to check in about a sprinkler system. So yes, let's get into that. When employees began arriving early Monday morning, they found themselves walking into ankle-deep water. The sprinkler system had been going off for the entirety of the overnight. As it turns out, it wasn't connected to an alarm to alert the fire department, so the sprinklers just kept going, and the place was a mess. Initially, they were just confused and tried to figure out what happened. They certainly weren't thinking anything terrible had happened. They figured something must have malfunctioned with their sprinkler system, or something small had tripped it. That's why Lisa's boss had called her in the first place. When Lisa's roommates told her boss that she didn't even make it home, some employees shuffled over to Lisa's desk to see if they noticed anything amiss. And that's when they knew they needed to call law enforcement right away. Next to Lisa's desk was a small garbage can that had been set on fire. There was evidence that a fire had been burning all around Lisa's workstation. Knowing that the young woman had not come home last night, and there was evidence that an intentional fire had been started around her specific workstation, her colleagues knew they needed more than a cleanup crew. They needed investigators. When police arrived, they agreed. In fact, as they started to clean up the water so that they could better investigate the space, they noticed the water was mixed with tinges of blood. That's when the carpet was pulled up and a large pool of blood was found that had soaked through. Whatever happened to Lisa that night in the office was violent, but police felt overwhelmed with what direction to go in. According to Lisa's colleagues, Lisa was supposed to be the only person at the office in the large commercial space that night. And Lisa definitely went in there thinking she was alone. The building was located in a large industrial park amongst other similar spaces. It's horrible to think how scared Lisa must have been when she realized someone else was in the building with her that night and that there was nobody around an office park late on a Sunday evening to hear her scream or to help her. Police deployed 2 dual investigations. This was highly time sensitive. If Lisa were still alive, she was badly injured and the clock was ticking to save her. So they had to do a large-scale physical search of the entire building and the areas surrounding it. I mentioned that it was part of a larger industrial area with lots of similar buildings, but I should also note that surrounding those office buildings was woods and green space. At the same time as conducting the physical search, police were interviewing anybody who had connections to Lisa. All of her 89 colleagues, roommates, friends, her ex-husband, everybody. The interviews didn't produce anybody who they could find would want to harm Lisa. There was no colleague infatuated with her who had been rejected by her or anything like that. She was well liked, and they couldn't find anybody who was jealous of her position or felt that she shouldn't have it because she was a woman, which I know sounds ridiculous, but if you follow true crime, you know these are legit motives from other cases. One by one, they kept interviewing people to not only rule people in or out as having involvement, but also to get a better sense of who Lisa was and if there was anybody in her life who would want to hurt her. While the interviews weren't leading any place, the physical search was, but not in a way that was giving much hope for finding Lisa Geise alive. Remember how I told you that her friends kept frantically trying to page her? Well, a couple of men working on a roof at a building across the street from Larson had heard a beeping sound. They went to investigate and found a woman's purse that looked like it had been tossed up onto the roof, and inside was a beeping pager. With the building across the street taped off in crime scene tape, the workers suspected this could possibly be significant and turned the purse over. The purse was indeed Lisa's. It had her ID and wallet and all her other belongings in there to prove it. The only thing missing from her purse were the keys to her 1993 Nissan Pulsar, which notably her vehicle was also missing and not parked in the lot like it had been the night before. When police searched the immediate area around the adjacent building, they found Lisa's sweater lying on the ground below where the purse would have been tossed up. One thing investigators had against them when it came to collecting evidence inside was the large-scale water damage. But something that also worked against them was the weather outside. That Sunday into Monday and all Monday had been rainy, and I mean downpouring rain. And because it's 1989, testing was already limited before you tossed in elements of the weather. Whoever harmed Lisa had the luck of weather on their side that night, acting as an accomplice in the cover-up. Later that same first day, police found Lisa's Nissan Pulsar a block away, parked in a parking lot off Park Drive Northwest. There was nothing missing inside, but the plates had been removed. I'm not sure how common these cars were back then, but the consensus was that this was a deliberate attempt to delay identification of the car, as Lisa still had Florida plates and that would have stuck out. A huge search was conducted all through the evening until it got too dark to look that night. Lisa's roommates, as well as her family, were devastated and shocked. Lisa's parents stayed at the apartment, hoping against all odds that they would hear that Lisa had been found alive, that she had been hurt, but she had escaped whoever had done this to her, and that she'd be okay. The last time Jean had seen Lisa was the weekend prior. She had driven up and gone shopping with Lisa and her own mother, Lisa's grandmother. They had treated Lisa to some new work suits and 3 pairs of shoes. But even bigger than that, they had helped Lisa pick out and purchase her wedding dress. Now Jean had to face the grief that she would never see Lisa in that dress outside of the store. As soon as the sun came up on Tuesday morning, the search was back on, and the physical ground search found even more disturbing clues. In the nearby woods, searchers found a bloody cloth mail cart and a large heavy metal object. If you've worked in a large office before, you've seen one of these mail carts, but just in case, I'm going to include a picture of what they look like on our Instagram, @simplertimecrimepod. The heavy object was recognized by employees as something that was kept close to Lisa's workspace and used as a doorstop. It was around 10 pounds and it was covered in blood. In another set of nearby woods off Communication Drive in Norcross, searchers found Lisa's Florida license plates that had been removed, as well as her car keys. But there were still no signs of Lisa. The Gwinnett County Sheriff's Department made the statement that they were officially investigating this case as a homicide. They felt there was almost zero chance that Lisa was still alive. I wanted to take a moment to thank you for your support and for tuning in this week and every week. This year, I'm trying to spotlight as many cold cases as possible, but I can't do so without your support. Please help me grow this podcast by sharing it with your friends, following us on your respective podcasting platforms, as well as on social media. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Each week, I share pictures aligned with the cases on Instagram, and on TikTok, you can find me doing mini episodes on discussion topics, true crime documentaries, recently solved cases from long ago, and spotlight cases. If you're interested in having me cover your relative's older unsolved case, please contact me at simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. Thank you, and now back to the show. By the end of Tuesday, police had gotten through 70 interviews with not too many more people to go. Despite the grim outlook, Lisa's workplace offered a $20,000 reward for her safe return. Before long, all employees had been interviewed. They had alibis, they had no reason to want to harm Lisa, and they all spoke highly of her. They were all cleared. But clues just kept pointing back to the workplace. There was no signs of forced entry, no signs of burglary. In fact, the business didn't even keep very much money on hand. The company had a work van for maintenance and certain deliveries relating to the business. The vehicle had been parked there Monday morning in its usual spot, so initially it wasn't looked into that deeply when there were other pressing places to search. But now it was found that the door of the company van had some blood stains on it. The source material does not specify if the stains were inside or outside of the van, but given the rain I spoke about, my sense is that the stains were probably inside the fabric of the van. Something about this van was that the key was left in the office in a spot where only people who worked there or who were there regularly would know where it was kept. There were special investigators doing forensic technology work, examining the work Lisa was doing that night, as well as any clues from the rest of the company computer files. And it was there that they found their next clue. A review of company computer systems from that day shows that someone was in the office that Sunday, deleting files and sabotaging the computer system. From there, a new theory emerged. Perhaps Lisa came back and interrupted somebody doing something they weren't supposed to, and Lisa was killed for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. That theory made the most sense, but who would be responsible? They had already eliminated current employees, so they decided to work backwards and looked for any former employees. Not long after starting this search, Detective Kevin Vincent grew interested in one former employee in particular. Because this man has never been charged, I'm going to refer to him as Jake. His real name is published in several news sources, but I'm not going to mention it here. Jake was 31 years old in 1989 and had been fired from the company just before Christmas of 1988. Jake had worked as an accountant at Larson and was fired for falsifying his resume. This was detected when the company conducted a background check and found that Jake was on federal probation for embezzlement. Yes, not the kind of guy you want working with your company's money. He had previously worked as a supervisor of accounting and finance at the Jackson Electric Membership Corporation and pled guilty in April of 1988 to embezzling $8,500. From there, his punishment was to be placed on federal probation. So, as you can imagine, when he saw the opportunity for another finance gig, he didn't exactly want to tell his new company about what happened at the last place. And when he was caught, he was terminated. If Jake had broken into Larson that night to destroy the computer systems as either revenge or to cover something else up he had done, possibly even more misappropriation of funds, and Lisa happened to stumble into him, Jake may have realized that he had two options. Have Lisa turn him in and face a hefty prison sentence, or kill Lisa and try to cover it up to prevent being caught. Detective Vincent wanted to pay him a visit and see what he could find out. But when he visited Jake at his apartment, Jake was cagey and uncomfortable. He denied being anywhere near the business that night, but he also didn't have an alibi. He had two people he was romantically intertwined with. He first had a pregnant wife who he was estranged from and didn't live with, and then he had a live-in girlfriend who wasn't home that night. Neither woman was willing to talk to police too very much. After that initial interview, Jake stopped speaking with detectives, period, and refused to further cooperate with the investigation in any way. Detective Vincent let Jean and Jack know that they had a prime suspect for the crime, but that he wasn't talking. Jean and Jack tried themselves to contact the suspect to no avail. By the third week of March, the Wallaces returned to Pensacola without answers about their daughter. The vigils and searches had all wrapped up, but Lisa's parents were already regrouping to figure out what to do next. Meanwhile, Detective Vincent wasn't giving up on Jake just yet. Detective Vincent put an undercover cop on Jake's tail to watch him for any suspicious activity. And while he didn't do anything that would lead them to Lisa's body, they did find he was crossing state lines without telling his probation officer, a violation of the terms of his probation. Jean Wallace contacted the Gwinnett County Dispatch so often they began to recognize her voice. But this time there was some good news. Jake, their prime suspect, had been arrested. Not for Lisa's murder, but for probation violation. They hoped that getting him for another crime might be an opportunity to further have time with him and get him to talk about Lisa's case. Jake was actually sentenced to 10 years in jail for this crime, so they felt they had some time to work with. But the Wallaces were not waiting around. Not long after they got back in Florida, they began conducting their own parallel investigation. Jean had begun writing letters. She wrote to newspapers, news stations, forensic investigators, private investigators, the like. She also wrote to Jake in prison, as well as Jake's estranged wife, girlfriend, mother, and brother. At the end of April, the Wallaces drove up and tried to confront Jake's estranged wife and girlfriend for information. They couldn't find the girlfriend, but they found the wife at her place of employment at a Kmart pharmacy. The estranged wife refused to talk and threatened to call security. Jean and Jack also had taken the desperate step of trying to talk to psychics, which breaks my heart because I so often see these people take advantage of grieving families. According to a series of articles on the case in the Atlanta Constitution, which I've linked in the show notes, part of working with psychics includes working with what's called dowsers, which are people who claim they can locate bodies by running a mystic stick over a map. They would then mail these maps to the Wallaces with an X on the spot. The Wallaces would faithfully go and pay for these maps, only to find that the X was in someone's driveway or a sidewalk. To say they were frustrated and disappointed was an understatement. But then they got a break. A colleague of Lisa's lived across the street from Jake's estranged wife, and she noticed that his wife was selling his BMW. Detectives had long wondered if Jake had used this vehicle to move Lisa's body or any items of evidentiary value that night, but they never had enough for a search warrant. Jean and Jack knew this, and so they decided to purchase the vehicle. They scraped together money from friends, family, and loans and purchased the sports car for $13,500. And with that, the state crime lab agreed to do a forensic search of the car. Now, I'll say, modern day Megan, I was a little bit thrown off by this. I think in theory it's a great idea, but if there had been some evidence that was found and it came to court, I figured there would probably be some issues from the prosecution standpoint with the chain of command of evidence. It wouldn't have followed the exact way that police would have needed to obtain the car, and having it in the possession of the Wallaces in the meantime would have really disrupted it. But I still don't blame them for trying. And I do just want to take a moment to talk about how relentless her parents were. They were incredible. They just never stopped. And you may not agree with all of their methods, but you can't fault them for just wanting to find answers about their daughter. I think most parents would admit that they would go to the ends of the earth in the same shoes that the Wallaces were walking in. So the state crime lab examined the car, but the Wallaces would get more bad news. This was just the spring of 1989, and forensics weren't advanced in a way that could seal a case unless it was very definitive. DNA advancements were in their infancy, and so what they had to work with back then for checking the car was good old luminol. That and looking for any fingerprints that would be connected to Lisa, but there weren't any. Luminol glows when you spray it on places where there have been blood, but it also illuminates for about 100 other substances, including bleach. So Jake's trunk did light up like a Christmas tree, but they couldn't prove any of it was connected to Lisa. And when I say that, I should clarify there wasn't anything like a large pool of blood or anything visible to the eye. It just was little spots all over the place. Adding insult to injury, all of the other evidence they had found, the bloody carpet area at the office, the doorstop, the mail cart, the water had compromised the evidence so much so that they couldn't even do a reliable blood comparison to confirm that the blood was Lisa's. So they definitely couldn't get any information on it about her killer. Defeated, the Wallaces were now $13,000 in the hole and no close to finding answers about their girl. The unanswered questions and the loss of their daughter was really taking a toll on them. Jean slept with Lisa's cat often. They brought all of Lisa's belongings back to their home in Pensacola and set up a bedroom in the exact way Lisa had it at her apartment. Jean kept Lisa's contact lenses in their case, and she would always keep replenishing the solution, never letting them dry out. She would take Lisa's work briefcases to places, and she kept it filled with all the notes and information she had collected about her daughter's case. By the end of August 1989, 2 new investigators were assigned as lead detectives. They took a crack at Jake themselves, trying to get him to sit down for an interview, but as soon as they introduced themselves, they said his face turned white and he just backed away, saying he wasn't speaking to them. The case would stall out for a few years. That was until 1993, when a person who previously would not talk decided to break her silence. Something had shifted. The estranged pregnant wife of Jake was now an ex-wife of Jake and the mother to a preschool-aged little girl. And suddenly she decided she wanted to talk. She said she had no idea if Jake had killed Lisa Wallace Geise, but she did have some ideas of where they could search. She and Jake had owned property in Talbot County, about 100 miles south of where Lisa had disappeared. She had remembered that when they first went to go look at it, he saw the wells on the property and made a chilling, eerie comment, quote, "This would be a great place to hide a body." On August 31st, 1992, investigators, Lisa's brother and Lisa's dad, as well as the medical examiner and a crew of 30 men, all descended on the property and started digging. This was extensive work. They were digging with backhoes and sending men down into the wells rappelled on a rope. Eventually, they found some bones, and emotions were at an all-time high. Had they finally found Lisa after all of these years? Her father said at the time that he was torn, which I think is completely understandable. If these bones belonged to Lisa, they would at least have some answers and evidence to push the case against the main suspect forward. But he also didn't want them to be hers because then he could hold out some sense of hope. The situation was a lose-lose one, and as it turned out, the bones were just those of deer and hogs. The search wrapped up and was determined to be a dead end. One evening, the Wallaces had come back up from Florida to do more recon on their suspect. You see, he ended up only serving a few years of his 10-year sentence, and they found out he was working at a restaurant. So they decided they were going to go in so they could finally see the man they believed killed their daughter face to face. This wasn't their first attempt. When he was in prison in Tallahassee, they had requested to meet with him. They were denied as he refused their visit, but they attempted anyways. It just felt like something they had to do. Now, as they pulled into the restaurant, they sat parked, unsure of their next move. And there they spotted him. They suspected he might be working in the back, but he was waiting tables. They actually noted how he looked awkward waiting tables, and he looked like a nerdy finance guy who was out of place in this work. Then the realization washed over them at the same time. What were they going to accomplish going in there? No matter how many times they pursued this obsession, no matter how many questions they asked, Jake was not going to provide them answers. And as of this recording in early 2025, he has still not provided answers. Lisa's case is cold and hasn't had any movement in over 30 years. Nobody is actively investigating it. Jake has gone on with his life free of any further consequence, while the Wallaces have had to age and go through their life without their daughter and without answers. Jean Wallace said in countless interviews that she just wanted to bury her daughter. Her anger has subsided, and all she wants to do is give her daughter the Christian burial in their church. Someone out there knows something, notably Jake. Back in 1989, a profiler at the GBI consulted on the case. It was their opinion that Lisa's killer was a calm and calculating past associate who was committing another crime when he was interrupted by Lisa. This person then reacted by bludgeoning Lisa with the doorstop and killing her. But this person didn't panic. They carefully discarded items into the woods and surrounding office park, trying to stall and throw off the investigation. The profile then went on to say that after this person concealed the crime and evidence, they went on with their life without remorse. Seems pretty spot on to one suspect if you ask me. But I hope they're wrong about one part. I hope that Jake, if you did this, you do feel remorse. That this has eaten at you for the past 36 years. You were angry at the direction your life was taking, and you decided you wanted to stick it to your former workplace. You wanted to cover some tracks that were going to get you into more trouble than you were already in. I think investigators and even the Wallaces would agree that you didn't set out to kill Lisa Geise that night, and that you weren't a cold-blooded killer going into that February evening. But when you were backed into a corner, you chose your freedom over her life, and that's a heavy burden to carry. While nothing could erase the violence you committed that day, nor bring Lisa back, The one thing you can still do is give her surviving family answers and peace, giving them the opportunity to bury their daughter and know what happened that night. If you were someone close to Jake and are listening, perhaps he confided in you and you've been too nervous to come forward. Maybe there's information you didn't realize was significant at the time, but could help out now. It's not too late to come forward and heat up this cold case. And to Gwinnett County, I hope you will consider Lisa's case and re-examine old evidence. I understand investigating cold cases takes money and resources, something that different departments don't always have. Back then, none of the evidence was able to have meaningful testing done because of the limitations of the time and the water damage. But so many advancements have happened since then. Maybe it won't make a difference in the end, but maybe, just maybe, deep in the evidence lies the one final clue that could close the case. If you have any information on the presumed murder of Lisa Wallace Geise, please contact the Gwinnett County Police Department at 770-513-5000. Thank you for joining me for another episode of A Simpler Time True Crime. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please leave a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Word of mouth helps me grow my audience and get information out there about these cold cases. Case suggestions can be sent to simplertimecrimepod@gmail.com. And as always, thank you so much for listening.